Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you once again by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen. It's Steve Lieber. Thanks for coming on, Steve.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
So the first issue of Superman's Pal Jimmy Olsen came out this week, and I have to admit, never in my life did I ever imagine that the number one book that anybody would be talking about in any given week was a Jimmy Olsen book. But that was what we faced this week. I feel like everybody was talking about it. Was that a little? I mean, you worked on it. Obviously, you're proud of it. Well, I mean, I hope you're proud of it. Was it surprising at all to see how much conversation there was about a book about Jimmy Olsen?
I don't know if it was surprising. It was definitely pleasurable. I mean, this is Matt Fraction's return to mainstream comics. That was immediately going to get some attention. It's a perfectly chosen project. I can't imagine a better pick than Matt for a book like this. And I think that he and I and Nathan and Clayton are a really good team. And we've worked really hard on this book. We've done lots of effort and lots of revision too. There's lots of places where we've gone back in and polished gags, planted stuff for future issues because we had a much longer lead time than usual. Mm-hmm. Funny, I feel like most of my career has been working on first drafts. It's just the nature of comics,
right?
You take any writing class at any grade, fifth grade, they're telling you writing is rewriting. And then you actually get into a professional thing and everybody's publishing the first thing that you type. Mm-hmm. And it's nice with Jimmy that DC knew they had something special and they gave us the lead time to finesse things, to tinker, to play around, so Matt can play around with phrasing, so I could go back and tweak things when a new gag occurred to me. We moved stuff from issue to issue. Actually, there's stuff in this issue that was originally for issue 2 that we moved back into issue 1, vice versa. I think the results speak for themselves. It's a really fun book. It's a book I wish I could pick up as a reader.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the amazing things about this book is if you could design a team that would be perfect for like a completely absurdist Jimmy Olsen book, you would, I mean, I'm not saying that for every person it'd be the same thing, but you, Matt, Nathan, and Clayton is about as good as you can possibly ask for, just for, obviously what we saw in the comic. But I do want to talk about that buildup because I was curious. It seemed like you all had been working on it for a bit as an outsider, but this is the first time I'd ever actually heard that confirmed. You mentioned it yourself, like publishing is often first drafts. Comics is even more so because everybody's always chasing that deadline, especially on a monthly book. What was the development of Jimmy Olsen? Like, how did it come together?
Matt texted me and said he had something cool. We'd been talking for years about doing something together, ever since we did that 10-pager on Hawkeye back in, was it 2013? God,
that was the New York hurricane one, right?
Yeah, the Hurricane Sandy story. Mm-hmm. He'd been, I guess, talking with DC about Jimmy for a while. He had a first script in with a good story arc and other things planned out, and was looking for an artist who could be a collaborator. He asked me if I would do it. I played Hamlet for a long time. I knew I wanted to, but I had to work some stuff out contractually and things like that. And finally, I realized that I'm not going to get a project like this again for a long time. This could be one of those things that they put on your tombstone,
right?
And I said yes, and we jumped into it.
So when was that? When did the fateful text come your way?
Fall of last year.
Oh my God. So you guys have you been, what has that process been like in the buildup? Because I mean, the first time, I mean, it wasn't the first announcement. It was kind of, I'm trying to remember when it first started coming out, but the first time we saw something from it was the Leviathan Rising one shot, the big prestige book, the record-setting prestige book, which features the longest cat vomiting scene in the history of comic books. Which, congratulations, by the way.
I'm very well. We should specify that that's in English language comics.
Oh yes,
there may be a 30 or 40 page sequence in a manga volume somewhere that I'm aware. In fact, I'd be disappointed to learn that there wasn't.
As a cat owner, were you particular? I mean, you know, it's an American record, but I mean, that was certainly a unique scene. I love the fact that somehow the first introduction to this Jimmy world was heavily, it was basically Dexter vomiting blood for like,
yes.
Was it 2 pages or was it 3 pages?
It was across 2 pages plus a little bit of dripping on a third. And we didn't do this in order. I think I already had 2 issues in the can when that story came to Matt, or when Matt was asked to deliver that. I'm never quite sure how the timelines work in the rest of the DC office. I'm bad enough at keeping track of when things are happening in my own email. But we already had a good chunk of our own Jimmy underway when Matt delivered that. So I it wasn't a surprise that we were going absurd, but when I realized that was going to be the first thing people saw of Jimmy, you know, the walk of shame in the Gorilla Hilton, and then a cat vomiting blood all over him. I thought this is the introduction we need. I want to make sure that people know what they're in for. This is not Hawkeye again. This is a very different comics experience. I think it's got all the energy and all the love of Hawkeye, but it's a very different sort of storytelling. And I think it's important to let people know right up front. This is what we're about. This is the sort of thing you can expect.
Yeah, and the thing about it is like the type of story you told there. Worst case scenario, I mean, no matter what, you're going to be standing out. It's something that people are going to be talking about, and so I think there's value in that. I do also think that with you said this isn't Hawkeye. The funny thing is like in a lot of ways, it kind of feels more like Casanova Matt than it does like Hawkeye Matt, and I think that's really interesting to see in like a big 2 comic, in a DC comic, especially one that's like tangentially associated with this large event that is happening at DC and everything with the event Leviathan. It's really, I don't know. I mean, I've been really, I literally was just writing this 10 things column I write every week on Sketched. And I was talking about how much I've enjoyed some of the atypical stories that DC's been telling. Like, they announced that Warren Ellis, Brian Hitch, Kevin Nowlan, the Batman's Grave book, which sounds really fantastic. And it's a 12-issue maxi series, and I love maxi series. Like, I have like a lot of love for just telling a condensed story that's told over 12 issues like that. But and that's what you guys are doing too. That's Jimmy Olsen's a 12-issue series. It's able to be the story it wants to be. One thing I'm curious about in terms of the development of it was, did you have any directive? Did you and Matt have any directive from DC as to what this needs to be, or is it just freedom to make the comic as weird as you think it needs to be?
I think it's been more Matt pitching for the stars, Matt aiming for the stars, pitching wildly, being told, yes, this, no, this, because this conflicts with something else we're doing, but yes, that, and sort of finding his way through the DC map. I think both of us creatively, we both approach it as if we're doing a creator-owned book.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, we don't own Jimmy Olsen, but we're not creating it like we're not working on it as if we didn't. Every choice I make on this feels like a choice that I would make on the Fix or on a project with Jeff Parker or something with Greg Rucka. I just serve the story, and if somebody says that's a little bit too far, then I'll rein it back. But at no point do I think, well, what would make sense for the DC universe? What does the greater DC universe need when I tell the story? I don't think that. I think about the actual moment that I'm describing and how it fits into the larger story we're telling.
Mm-hmm. So you guys weren't thinking of the larger tapestry of the DC universe when you created Joaquin Olsen, the I don't know, was he the grandfather of Jimmy, or is he the great?
I think we identify him as great some number of greats.
Yeah, it's a number of greats.
Yeah, as always with the timeline in the DC universe, you have to a little bit.
It's malleable.
Yeah, the numbers are going to keep changing. And at some point, Perry White is going to be is going to have been working in newspapers long after the daily newspaper is gone.
Right.
They're going to be far enough. They're going to be far enough into the future that Perry White's entire career would have been after newspapers started shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, and I haven't. I hesitate to speak for Matt because I haven't actually talked to him about this. But Matt has a really clear picture for the background of the Olsens and the Luthors, and that's going to be an ongoing part of the story. That's not just 2 pages and then it's going away.
Sure. Yeah, it felt kind of like a bit of a mission statement up front that it was going to be a big part of it. I do want to say, I thought that you guys had a very nice touch with the whole Perry White newspapers aren't going to last forever thing, given the fact that Jimmy Olsen pivoted to video. Yeah. I mean, that was such a perfect touch. It is kind of funny though, because it's both a pivot to video, but also like Jimmy Olsen is like if an actual newspaper made fail videos.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
I mean, like the montage you did in the first issue where, I think my favorite one is when it looks like a Marlboro truck is somehow flying to crush Jimmy, and it's like all the the 6-panel montage that shows all of the different hijinks he gets into that somehow leads to immense value for the Daily Planet was absolutely genius. I guess like from a gag standpoint, because it sounds like you had a lot of time to go back and revise some of these things. What was the collaboration like between you and Matt? Was a lot of it him finding space for you to find the best way to tell jokes or to realize these types of moments? How did you two work when it came to that front?
It's interesting. When Nick and I worked together on Superior Foes of the Fix, it was a whole lot of yes and. Nick would give me a very loose framework, and then I would just start improvising in there and would put in stuff that wasn't in the script at all. I would come up with whole pages of material that weren't really in the script.
Like the Mach 5 example that you posted on Twitter. I mean, like, I remember, I think you posted about that kind of about in regards to like, it'd be hard for somebody to tell you how to do that because it was just something you improvised on. And I thought that was such a good example of comedic timing and just, I don't know, what an artist really contributes to a story. Sorry to interrupt. I just thought that was a great example.
With Matt, his gags are very, very tightly formed in the script phase. He knows what tier of the page every beat is going to fall on. He knows he's got a really good sense of when the camera needs to move, when it needs to not move. They're very, very complete scripts. He's not doing the Alan Moore thing of filling up 4 pages of dense type to describe a panel, but everything's there. There's plenty of places where all I have to do is just exercise a little bit of judgment and say, yes, I can draw this exactly as he's described it, and it will be funny.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a lot of back and forth in how do we make this joke work? How do we make this land? There's lots of kibitzing. There's a lot of texting. He and I will get together and just shovel pie down our throats. Just crazy amounts of pie, and throw stupid ideas at each other and see what detonates. And some good stuff has come out of that. But for gags like that 6-panel survey of Jimmy's idiot hijinks, Matt described those 6 moments, and I read them and I laughed when I read them in the script, and I knew that's if I just draw them deadpan, to draw what he described, it will be funny. I saw an interview with the actor who played the boss on Office Space, the guy in the suspenders.
Oh, John
C. Come in this weekend.
Gary Cole,
that fellow, and he talked about getting that gig, and he talked about trying to decide how he should play that role. And Office Space, as you may know, had been animated beforehand. Mike Judge had done all the voices, and he said, I just did what Mike Judge did because I wasn't going to come up with anything funnier than that. and that's frequently how it is with Stuff and Jimmy. What Matt puts down on that script page is hilarious, and all I have to do is not fuck it up.
I like another moment I really like in the issue, and I imagine, I mean, this is where you start falling into the magic of comics, to be dramatic about it. But it's like, I love the bit where Clark is winking at the camera when he's like saying that might be a job only Superman can handle. The first one is funny. The second one, where he's still staring at the camera winking, is even funnier. And it's like, the execution of that is just so on point. And that might be something from the script too, but I don't know. It's the thing I really loved about Jimmy Olsen, the first issue. It was just, it really felt like everyone involved with the book had such a good grasp on what each of you wanted, but also like how to best complement each other's ability. I didn't realize pie was the reason for it, but that's a very delicious reason for it.
Pie is an underrated component of the creative process. Folks need to be thinking more about pie.
Oh yeah, I know that. I actually, when my wife and I got married, there, apparently you're supposed to have like a groom's cake on top of just having the regular wedding cake. And I'm not saying I don't like cake, but I certainly prefer pie, and so I had groom's pies instead. I'm very team pie.
I think that's a great idea. And I mean, a wedding cake, sometimes those things have to sit around for 3 days to set or something. I think folks would be a lot better off with a pie or cupcakes.
Oh yeah.
Wow, boy, you said we were going to go off the tangent.
Hey, you know what? I that is not even. I went into some very interesting places. I talked to Becky Cloonan about like toaster ovens for like 10 minutes once on this podcast. Well,
Wow.
she had a in her forward or like her little dedications in the beginning of By Chance or Providence, her collection of her little mini comics. She dedicated one to Guy Davis and said like the first one was this very like poetic thing to somebody named Madeline, and it turns out it was actually to Madeline Pryor from the X-Men, which I thought was extra hilarious. But then she did one to Guy Davis and it just said, "Thanks for the toaster oven!" exclamation point. And I had to ask her about it because I love toaster ovens. So, you know, one thing led to another and we were talking about tuna melts. And my favorite part about it is I actually ended up getting several emails and tweets from people who listened to the podcast and then used the toaster oven to make a tuna melt. I was like, my job here is done.
Wow.
Yeah. The power of podcasting, Steve.
This is good to know. Interestingly, my wife's been out of town on a teaching gig, so I've been completely uninspired to do any kind of serious cooking. So I've been sustaining myself largely on tuna melts in her absence.
Oh, that is a solid choice. That is a very solid. I actually used to, this is my nefarious, like as nefarious as I'd get when it came to going to a movie. My mom and I used to go see movies together, and I would use my toaster oven to make tuna melts beforehand, and I would sneak them into the movie. And so we would sit there and eat tuna melts while watching the movie. And like in retrospect, I might have been a jerk because some people probably don't enjoy the smell of tuna melts, but they were very delicious.
I love the smell of a tuna melt, but I would still label that as sociopathic.
Well, thank you. Speaking of sociopaths, let's talk about Jimmy Olsen. I want to ask one thing about Jimmy because he's a funny character. I feel like he's one of those characters kind of like J. Jonah Jameson. And I don't know. I mean, like, I'm really J. Jonah Jameson, where it's like people in comics who make comics have an affinity for that character that maybe not every fan does. And I feel like Jimmy Olsen for some reason fits you. Like when I think of Jimmy Olsen and I think of you and Matt, I'm like, there's something about that makes sense. Did you have any personal Jimmy Olsen background?
Just having read a lot of deeply weird Superman and Jimmy Olsen comics as a kid, there were always Jimmys being reprinted in those DC 100-page for 60 cent things that were all over the place in the 70s. I had, as a very young kid, somehow gotten a copy of one of Jack Kirby's Jimmy Olsen, Don Rickles team-ups.
Yeah.
And you could picture 7-year-old Steve holding this comic at arm's length with his head cocked like a spaniel, and just a giant question mark floating above my head. I knew who Don Rickles was. I'd seen him on like afternoon talk shows and what have you, and of course I knew who Jimmy Olsen was, and I just couldn't figure out why these worlds were intersecting. It wasn't the team up I was expecting, but it was comics, so I read it, and that stuck in my brain for years and years. One of the first times I ever got to be funny in a comic was a 4-page Harley Quinn story that Carl Kiesel wrote that was a Harley Quinn Jimmy Olsen team up.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jimmy was probably my first chance to try to be funny in a well-distributed comic.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like 2001, so it was a lot. And Superior Foes wasn't until 2012 or 2013. So there's a big gap in between there. So getting to go back to Jimmy and be funny again. Okay, this is where I figured out that it's possible for me to do it.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the humor in your art here in a second, but I do have to mention I did not know that Jimmy Olsen and Don Rickles teamed up before, and I now have to read those comics because that is so weird. I think Jimmy Olsen's funny because I feel like he has this long history of being this super oddball, and it's kind of like always permeated in comics to a certain degree. And this is like what you and Matt are doing is kind of a manifestation of that. It's like the ultimate version of it. But at the same time, I did not know Jimmy Olsen and Don Rickles combination existed, especially considering the fact that my version of Don Rickles is Mr. Potato Head from Toy Story. And so I can just imagine him calling Jimmy Olsen a hockey puck for some reason. That's what I imagine.
It's really something. And it's the only time I can think of where it's the only celebrity caricature I can think of Jack Kirby doing. It was one of Kirby's issues.
Oh,
so that there's the extra level of bizarreness there.
Yeah,
and he did a great caricature. He nailed it. It's unmistakable. But you could probably find him reprinted online on some nostalgia blog somewhere. They're really funny, weird ass comics. I assume Mark Evanier had something to do with making it happen, since he was kind of going back and forth between being a Kirby liaison and writing for variety shows.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, in the 60s, DC had a whole thing going where they were doing comic books about comedians.
Mm-hmm.
They had Bob Hope, they had Jerry Lewis. In the 70s, they did Welcome Back, Kotter. It's a genre I'd like to see more of.
Yeah. I actually like to think, though, that Jack Kirby just randomly put Don Rickles in there. Like, so who do you want to, what should this character be? And he's like, Don Rickles. You're like specifically Don Rickles, or another character named Don Rickles? He's like, Don Rickles. We're like, okay, you're Jack Kirby. Do what you do.
Do it. Yeah, it's clearly licensed. They got his photographs on the cover and everything.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so weird. It's not, I mean, like, that is probably the last thing I would have expected to hear from, like, this is a comic that Jack Kirby did. Yo, everybody. I want to take a second to talk about my friends at TKO Studios. TKO Studios is a new comic publisher that launched with what the New York Times calls an impressive slate of talent. They publish books by top creators, including Roxane Gay, Jeff Lemire, Garth Ennis, Gabriel Walta, and many more. TKO also does things differently than other publishers. They binge release their books and offer each title in whatever format you most enjoy reading your comics in, whether that's a 6-issue set in a collector's box, trade paperback, or digital download. I'm a single issues guy, so I went that route and I love the collector's box. Even better, all of TKO's first issues are free to read at tkopresents.com right now. So if you're curious, visit tkopresents.com to give them a try, or follow at TKO Presents across all social platforms. And if you're a store that's interested in stocking TKO's books, email retailers at tkopresents.com to learn more about one of the best retailer deals in the industry. And now, back to the show. But in terms of the humor, I mean, I think one of the interesting things about your career is, for a long time, you were not the funny artist.
God, no.
So I guess one of the questions I have about, the whole idea of, you becoming a funny artist, like, I feel like you're, for most readers today, you're probably considered like one of the more notable, like, comedic artists. Is that a niche you're happy to reside in after being decidedly not funny for most of your career?
Oh, absolutely. I'm thrilled by it. My favorite stuff to read is funny material. There's, the market hasn't supported it all that much, so there's not a lot of it out there. Not in mainstream comics. Web comics are full of great 4-panel gag stuff and things like that. But for whatever reason, the direct market generally has not been hugely supportive of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know too many folks in any entertainment media who get to have a second act.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a very good run as a superhero and crime artist, and I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. But it's it is a blast to get to play in an entirely different league, and to make choices with a different set of goals. I also think that drawing funny has made it possible for me to be a better artist.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a huge admirer of minimalists, Toth, Harvey Kurtzman, folks like that. But my skill set and my impulse was always to move towards more texture, more illustrative effects, more darkness and heavy lighting, more emphasis on reinforcing the three-dimensionality of every form and every panel I was drawing. It's the kind of thing that's great for crime comics, great for war comics, where you want that solidity and solemnity that to give the material the gravitas it needs. But it kills jokes. It just kills the jokes. And I never gave myself permission to stop when a panel was well designed but not a complete illustration before. And now I don't have to exercise discipline to make that choice.
Mm-hmm.
When's the panel done? When the joke works. If the joke lands, put the pen down, take my hands away from the drawing board. Because I know that anything that doesn't make the panel work better makes it work worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there really can be, when it comes to humor, it can be like addition can lead to subtraction. It's the more you add to it, the less it works. And I don't know. I mean, I guess how do you know, I guess, because it feels. What's that?
Does it make me laugh? I'm my own beta testing audience. This sounds like a joke, but it's not. I will sometimes have something really awful, like The Handmaid's Tale,
mm-hmm.
On a screen on my Cintiq while I'm working.
Yeah.
And I'm working on the comic, and if I can still laugh while the awful things are happening in the little tiny window, then I know that I've probably got a good comic.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah. It's like if you can overcome the misery that's happening in whatever you're engaging with, you're like, now I'm killing it.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's funny because I recently interviewed the team of Assassin Nation, the Image Skybound book. Erica Henderson, Kyle Starks, Darren Bennett, et cetera, et cetera. And when I was talking to Kyle about his scripts for that book, which is a very funny book, he said the same thing for when it came to script writing. He said it's just like, if I make myself laugh, I feel like I'm going to make the audience laugh. And yeah. I mean, I think that's really what it comes down to it. I mean, I don't know if that's the formula for everyone that's ever been comedic, but I do think that's, I mean, I was trying to think of like some sort of artistic feel or something like that. It's just like, I just know because I have this like spidey sense of comedy, but really the spidey sense of comedy is laughter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I listen to podcasts a lot while I work, or I just recently finished the book, I think it was called Improv Nation by Sam, what's his name? The same fellow who wrote the Bob Fosse biography that was recently adapted into the Fosse miniseries. Anyway, terrific book following the history of improv as a dramatic exercise and how it morphed into what it became for comedy. There's lots of places in there where humor theory comes up. Same with a lot of podcasts that I'll listen to, where people start talking about why a joke works or what's the thinking behind a joke, and it's fascinating. And none of it will actually make a joke funny.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose for a serious professional joke writer or gag writer, they do start to think about actual bits of comedic theory, but theoretically funny is not funny. Funny
Right.
is funny.
Yeah.
And yeah, does it get that spasm? Does it get the weird little chimpanzee scream broken up into bite-sized bits that constitutes an actual laugh? And we talked earlier before we started recording about mentoring a little bit. I'm pretty good at teaching a lot of aspects of comics. I have no clue how to teach funny.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. I could be a little diagnostic on something in front of me maybe, but I wouldn't begin to know how someone could teach funny. Either it is or it isn't. I had no idea myself if I could do it until I started doing it, and people agreed with me that the results were good.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably nothing less funny in the world than hearing someone actually talk joke theory.
Sure.
Oh my God. Yeah, it could kill a room. But at some point when you're working on it, your brain just kind of starts going through all the possibilities and thinks through 10 different ways something could work, and it settles on the one that gets a laugh.
Yeah. I do think that, like, getting deep into joke theory and stuff like that, I wonder if, I mean, it's kind of like with any job. It's like if I've brought this up in my podcast before. My wife is an architect. She looks at buildings in a way that I do not. And so it's like comedians, they probably like it, because they know how to deconstruct everything and know joke theory and comedic theory and everything like that. Humor to them, I'm not going to say it's formulaic, but they can see the structures in it in probably a way that a person like me wouldn't.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, I read this one line in the Los Angeles Times announcement of the book that I thought was it was a great one from you, where you said part of the reason why Jimmy Olsen is funny is because of the juxtaposition of the ordinary and the extraordinary. And I thought that was a really nice line that pairs really well with Jimmy Olsen, who is the perfect bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary. He's a normal dude who just happens to have, is it a watch? A watch that allows him to communicate with Superman?
That can summon,
summons
a watch that summons Superman.
Exactly. And so he is like the ideal person for that. What is it about the ordinary and the extraordinary that's such a tasty land of comedy for you?
Oh, okay. Let's think about that. The remarkable is made more remarkable, and the mundane is made more mundane. There's a lot of absurdity in one believable but completely inappropriate detail in the right place.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like contrast makes something more funny.
Yeah. I guess it's the same reason that desert island gags work for single panel comics, because it's funny to strip away everything except for one key bit of absurdity or one key interesting detail.
Mm-hmm. Well, we talked a lot about Jimmy Olsen. I do want to move on to something that you were talking about. Like, you can't talk to people about joke theory, but you can talk to them about art and how you can sort all of that out. And as we were talking about before we started recording, your name has always come up a lot with artists that I talk to, and it's a wide mix. Not like you're part of Helioscope Studios, which is a Portland studio of artists who work in the comic community, all artists and writers who work within the comic community and work in a studio-like environment. But it's not just Helioscope people. Like I told you beforehand, I talked to Tom Fowler, and he called you his rabbi. I was actually texting with Tad Galusha today, and he gave me a lot about you because he reveres you. And he specifically said, and I'm going to quote, "The dude is truly everything I respect in a human being." And and he said a lot more than that, but I mean, that was kind of the gist of it. I was talking to James F. Wright, who's a writer, about a big moment for him. And he talked about this one time when he talked to you at a Comic-Con, and about how that advice really helped him figure out his approach to his own career. These are stories that come up because you help people. You really help artists, you help writers, you help people that are interested in working in comics figure things out. I mean, I know this is, I don't know. You have to obviously be passionate about helping people, but why is that something you wanted to do? Is that something that kind of stemmed from working in the studio environment, or is that just an interest to you, trying to help people out?
It could be a lot of things. I think I was pushy and didactic about things before it was useful to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was trying to teach people and help people before I knew anything.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do it and you're an ignoramus like I was, it doesn't come across very well. I think I just grew into it. And now that I actually know some stuff and have some things to say and some use to people, maybe that might be a bit too self-flagellating there. Let me try to think about this more sincerely. Part of my comics origin story, I've told this story before, is that when this story sounds like an exaggeration, but it's how it happened. When I told my dad that I was going to leave my full ride scholarship to Penn State, where I was studying business, to instead become a cartoonist, and go and pay good money instead of studying for free, and I would be paying $10,000 a year or so to go study at the Joe Kubert School. My dad's reaction was pretty simple. He took out an ad in the local Penny Saver newspaper and sold the furniture in my bedroom.
Oh my God.
And yeah, it was very clear. You could do this idiotic thing that you're planning to do, but you're not going to do it under my roof.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I was young and stupid, and it just made me defiant. But I think, on some level, I think I was pretty seriously traumatized by it, and knowing that there was no fallback position. I remember paying very close attention to the restaurants in my area and knowing when they threw out their garbage, so I would know the best times to dumpster dive.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very, very clear that I knew that this is what I wanted to do, that I wanted to make comics, but I was also I had an absolute terrified, morbid fear of being homeless.
Mm-hmm.
And of not having anywhere to turn. And so I get a lot of pleasure out of offering useful mentorship to somebody at an earlier stage in their career, somebody who's trying to figure things out, because I had a little stretch where I didn't have that, and it was terrifying to me. And I don't like to think of anybody else just feeling like they're on that desert island with nobody to ask a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things is, like, even if you go to art school, it's it can teach you how to draw, but there's like all kinds of questions that come with working. I mean, not just in art, but working in comics in general that you don't really know. And there's no real, like, it's not like there's a formal network that helps you understand all these intricacies and everything like that. If you're working in a studio, that certainly helps because then you can talk to people who've been there before. But,
I wanted to make the formal network.
What's that?
I wanted to make that informal network to replace the lack of a formal one.
Yeah. I mean, and that helps a lot. I mean, and I think that's a big reason why, people bring you up so much is because that's not a given. Not everyone finds that. And, a lot of times, like I said, people have to find that for them. Like I had Jen Bartel on the podcast a little while ago, and she was on specifically to talk about she gets a lot of questions from people about like, how do you do this? How do you, what are the right tools? Like, how do I find, break into comics, et cetera, et cetera. And we did the podcast trying to answer some of those questions because she gets them so often. But I think a big part of it stems from the fact that, like ideally, like we talked about Comic Twart before we started recording and about like how important that community was for those people. Ideally, you find your community of peers, but it's always good to find somebody who's been there before. And like I told you before too, it's like Tom Fowler, who I mentioned as calling you his rabbi. Like I think he acted like that for Comic Twart, and I think there's a lot of value in finding people you can lean on. And I don't know, I mean, it's just funny because it's like you're to a certain degree like the whatever the parent equivalent of or 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon is.
Wow.
I mean that in the nicest way, Steve. I mean, like, seriously, like it's people speak about you reverentially in like a way that you've genuinely helped their careers. And I think that I don't know, that's awesome. That's great.
Oh, it's hugely gratifying to hear that anything I've put out there has meant things to somebody. And going back to what you were saying earlier, I think it is enormously important to develop that peer network, because I can give a lot of advice, but cartoonists today are frequently in situations that I've never experienced, and the best I can do is refer them to someone who has experienced that, or who might have a better answer. Mm-hmm. My experience is of a cis white guy, which is a significant thing, and I don't ever want to play that down thinking about how I got to where I got in the business. The industry I came up in does not exist.
Right.
When I was coming into comics, you could talk about the comics industry. We don't have a comics industry. We've bifurcated into like 6 or 7 comics industries now. All these varying ecosystems that barely intersect, mm-hmm. except when it comes time to compete for tables at some of the better conventions. Mm-hmm. There's folks who know those ecosystems way better than I ever will. And the best I could do for someone who wants to know about that slice of the world is maybe steer them towards somebody I know who's talked about those issues on Twitter, or who I've had a good conversation with. Oh, you should go talk to Spike Trotman. She's answered this a million times. She knows all about that. It's a really, really big world in comics now. It's for a lot of folks, the money is far worse than it was when it was smaller. Mm-hmm. But it's a much more expansive world with so many other ways in, and ways to prosper, and ways to support yourself. I don't feel like there's any one person who could have their finger on the pulse of all of it. There's people whose job it is to know all of comics, who would be the first to tell you that they can't. Tom Spurgeon or Heidi MacDonald know this field as well as anybody possibly could. And I'm sure both of them have giant slices of comics that they're just ignorant of, because there aren't enough hours in the day to know both the, to know the art, to know the craft, and to know the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that, I mean, to a certain degree, that's a societal thing almost, as much as, I mean, comics are very much, their own beast and everything like that. But I feel like we're kind of almost in an era of specialization, because it's so hard to know and be able to do everything. You used to be able to be a jack of all trades. And I don't know if like you can excel at multiple things in the same way you used to be able to, because there's so damn many things.
Yeah, there's more things that you have to know. On the other hand, like there's, for a lot of the cartoonists who I grew up admiring and studying, they didn't need to know much beyond storytelling and creating effective, reproducible line art, and something about business and who's worth talking to and who's not. Now, so many young cartoonists, folks in their early to mid 20s, they have to understand pre-press. They have to understand both the structure and the grammar of communicating on the internet. They have to know how to be an appropriate person on a whole bunch of different social media, all of which have their own quirks and rules. They have to know what's the right amount of hype, what's the wrong amount of hype, what's the right attitude to take. They have to know how to deal with not just deal with a printer, but deal with a printer on the other side of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
They have to know about paper specking. They have to know, it's things that big companies used to have whole departments to take care of. Now these folks have to deal with it while still making their comic.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy amount of work. I guess one nice thing about the network that my studio has created is that there's a lot of people in the orbit who do some of the side jobs. I know several people who are professional print technicians whose whole job is making sure that the files you gave them will reproduce correctly, and who serve as the liaison between you and the printer, finding the right printer, finding the right paper, making sure that the InDesign files that the printer gets are exactly what they need. It's a big job, and if you don't know someone who can do that, you've got a lot of learning and the potential for a lot of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
A dear friend artist of mine, one of the most competent people I know, had a successful first Kickstarter, but in the process of juggling all the 90 things you have to do to make a Kickstarter work, turned in a final file to the printer that was missing a signature of the book, that was missing a chunk of 8 pages right in the center of the book. So the book went to press with 8 pages missing right in the middle, and she wound up having to pulp the entire print run, taking a profitable Kickstarter and turning it into one that probably lost 5 figures.
Mm-hmm.
And that's devastating for anyone at any point in their career. I can't imagine what it felt like at the start of a career.
Yeah. I think, it's the weekend of San Diego Comic-Con, and I think that if you just look at cons, like the con experience, and like what like San Diego looked like in like 1999 even versus 2019, I mean, just the merchandising angle, like that whole thing is like, okay, you're an artist. Now you have to find a way to convert your work into merchandisable materials that you can sell at your table. It's not just doing commissions and books anymore. It's I'm going to make an enamel pin. I'm going to do a print. Well, print was always kind of a thing. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it's amazing. It's like, that goes back into the specialization. It's like, at that point, you almost need to know somebody like Andrea Demonakos who can help you out with something like that. Because it's like, at a certain point, like, people have limits. It's like, you can't do everything. And you have to, I think that's an important thing that people have to realize is like, you need to realize what you're capable of and what you have the time for and what you have to like hire out for. And that is a point of privilege. Like, not everybody can afford to hire out for things like that, but it certainly helps a lot.
Oh, it's huge. And in the end, it's a must because there's only so many hours in the day. Making comics takes a long time. There's just no way to fill pages without spending a lot of time at the board doing nothing else. And then you have to somehow run a small business in all the time that's left and be a human being and get some exercise, cook a meal, do something that's not your business so that you don't break down crying and go insane.
Mm-hmm.
It's brutal. It's really rough.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny. A frequent topic of conversation is the lack of people in comics in the business support sector.
Oh yeah.
I feel like for the people out there who want to make a living in comics, but just don't have the skill set or the patience to actually make comics, if you like this world, there's a place for you in helping cartoonists run a business. I've talked to folks who do this, and they all have a different origin story, in a different way that it became their full-time gig. But for most of them, it started with helping one cartoonist with one thing that they knew how to do. I've worked with T-shirt printers, so I helped them do a run of T-shirts that they could sell at conventions. Or I knew about print buying, so I helped them negotiate a deal with a Chinese printer. Or I'm really good at organizing schedules, so I helped them work out their convention and travel schedule and plan a signing tour. Comics is stuffed. There's always room for more, but it is stuffed with people who know how to tell a story or know how to draw pictures, because it's a good place for that. If you're a really good visual storyteller, if you've got really good picture making chops, comics is a very satisfying place to work. And it's it's not the most lucrative, but it's really enjoyable, and you can make a living there. If you're a good business person, by gosh, there's a lot of places you can go. Comics are not necessarily the first place you think of to take your skill set. So there's a demand for you right there. I always wondered, what would comics be like if we had 50 marketing people who were as great at what they do as Chris Somney is at drawing, or Ivan Brandon is at writing. The marketing folks we have are terrific, but they're overwhelmed, and there's not that many of them. There's just not that many of them in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And I just keep wondering, what if there was this big wave of folks who could do that part of the job.
Yeah, I mean, I work in marketing, and that's one of the things I think about a lot, just because. And this is definitely not me casting aspersions on any marketing people in comics, but to a certain degree, one of my frustrations as a marketer is that comics are kind of always marketed the way comics are marketed. And there's not, it doesn't often feel like there's a lot of outside the box thinking, because it's just like there's the playbook and you kind of execute the playbook. And I always wish that there was a little bit more. And I don't, that's me saying that in a broader sense. That doesn't mean I have answers. And once, I'm sure these people have come up with lots of answers that just didn't pan out or didn't work out. But it just feels like there's something there, and I don't know what that is. But like I said, easier said than done for me as an outsider. It's easy to play armchair quarterback when you don't have any skin in the game.
Oh yeah. And yeah, I'm very aware that, yeah, that the people who are doing marketing at comics companies, they're essentially being the individual publicist for 15, 20, 30 different individuals.
Right. And that's, must feel like schizophrenia.
Yeah. And they're at the mercy of corporate schedules and marketing plans that are set by the people who are looking at spreadsheets rather than the people who are actually looking at the books. I would not want to deal with the hassles that they have to go through, and it is brutal to sell anything right now.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad I'm not the person who has to reach out to people and say, we want you to pay $3.99 for this, even though you could go to a creepy Russian website right now with downloaded for free.
There's so many creepy Russian websites.
There's so many of them, yeah.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, I wrote an article about that a few years ago, and it was like reading the numbers, like just looking at the numbers, even like the outside numbers, which probably are not even the picture. It was just kind of astonishing. I mean, I as a person, like I restarted Sketched as a subscription site, and it was it's tough. I mean, first off, like there's a lot of subscription services out there. Second off, asking people to pay for anything on the internet is tough, because it's like we've spent decades like telling people that is not a thing that exists. Like the internet is free. Like that is the way that we like it. But at the same time, it's really hard to make money off of banner ads these days. And so you kind of have to come up with other solutions. But I wanted to close with, this might be tough, like trying to boil down, the advice that you might give somebody in a simplified manner is impossible, because it's all situational. It's like if a person comes to you for X, it's going to be different than if they came to you for Y. But at the same time, if you were talking to, like, let's say there's a new intern at Helioscope Studios, and they want to know, like, what is the best 3 pieces of advice you can give me? What would you start with? And would sitting up straight be number 1, number 2, or number 3?
Sitting up straight exists outside of rank. It's everything. If you don't have good posture, your career is going nowhere. But the base advice I give to everybody who's trying to build a career, and this is career advice, not art advice, is that how success works is changing constantly. The mechanisms are changing constantly. But there's 3 basic principles. Number 1, do good work. Number 2, do a lot of it. Number 3, put it in front of as many eyeballs as you possibly can. And I could get it. I can always get further into the specifics on those things and talk more about which eyeballs are worth getting in front of, which ones aren't, etc. But those are the 3 principles right there. Be good, be prolific, and be seen.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the one thing I'd say that the younger generation is far better than me at is being seen. Like, I feel so sheepish sometimes, like talking about myself on the internet, because it's like, I don't know. I don't feel like I'm conditioned to be okay with self. Like I can talk about somebody else endlessly. Like if you wanted me to sit here and talk about how good Javier Rodriguez is at art, I would be able to do that endlessly. But talking about myself, I'm just like, ugh, can we talk about anything else? But it's like, I feel like the coming up the generation, because I don't know if it's a social media thing or if it's just kind of like the way of the world, but I feel like they're so much better at it. Like if I could, Hassan Otsman El How is somebody who has a lot of talents, but if I could steal his ability to like, pitch himself in a lot of different ways, I would take that in a heartbeat, because he is so good at it without seeming overwhelming. And I secretly hate him for it. I'm sorry, Haas. It's true.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing on that. I don't think the kids today are better at it. I think it's just that you're not hearing from the ones who aren't.
Oh, that's true.
I think there's just as many wildly talented shy people as there ever were. Only we can't see those stars because of light pollution.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess naturally, if I'm following people on Twitter, I'm probably used to people who are actively speaking about themselves. And so it's like there's a little bit of, what's the phrase, like self-selection. It's like, there's still the issue there, but maybe it's not as notable, because I have like a small sample size of people that I'm selecting from, being like, look, they totally get it. They can do this.
Oh, yeah. That said, I have my own just blown away with kids today thing, where I'm constantly seeing people who are younger than I was when I started my career, who already have mature styles, who have 200 pages of storytelling, and great chops as illustrators, and well-developed online personalities who are already doing everything, and they're the age I was when I was still trying to figure out how I was going to pay for my third year of art school, and I put a lot of that down to the fact that there's incredibly good art education available on the internet for free. Every great art textbook is downloadable at one of those creepy Russian websites we mentioned earlier. There's hundreds of hours of wonderful art instruction available on YouTube, and most of them have had access to a community of artists, of peers and slightly older folks that they can show stuff to and get feedback from and compete with and learn from. And the process that I didn't really start until I was 19 or 20. For all the time I spent doodling in high school and sitting in my room and practicing, most of that time I think was just spent rehearsing mistakes over and over. Mm-hmm. Whereas they've been doing useful work and really getting better, to the point where it never surprises me to find a wildly accomplished artist who's not able to get served in a bar.
Mm-hmm. You should have you read Sheets by Brenda Thumler?
No.
It was a Lion Forge release a little. I guess it was technically, I don't remember what the name of their young readers imprint. It's like Carrick Howell or something like that. But I just had her on my podcast, and she is like an absolute wonder. Her book Sheets is fantastic. It's a graphic novel. It was the first one she did herself. She was the artist for a Anne of Green Gables graphic novel, but she had like never worked in comics. She didn't read comics. She didn't do anything. And then she just like I did a podcast with her recently, and she was just kept recounting these things where she was just like, I was trying to not work in comics and it just happened this way. But it was interesting because it was like a fateful meeting with Mariko and Jillian Tamaki's this one summer that really introduced her to the fact that comics can be something different besides superheroes. And it was like, I don't know. I mean, when I was talking to her, I was just like astonished, because you read her book and it's like somebody who just understood the medium on this unbelievably innate level that it's like she didn't even need to read comics to know how to do it perfectly. And I don't know how that happens. I mean, like, people like that are wonderkins to me. It's just like astonishing. But yeah, if you get a chance, you should definitely read it. It's very good.
Oh, that sounds sheets. And what's her name?
Brenna Thumler. I can send you an email with it, but actually, I can tell you for a fact that Powell's has a lot of it because I bought my copy when I was down there a couple weeks ago.
Brenda Thumler. Okay. We're just going to keep saying her name over and over.
I'll shoot you an email. But anyways, well, we could go on to this forever. Steve, that's actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on, giving some advice, talking Jimmy Olsen. I really appreciate you taking the time.
David, my pleasure. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Steve Lieber. You can find Steve on Twitter at Steve_Lieber and his work in Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show in there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Nathan House, Litwin Studios, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Leona Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gibbs, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Connor Farna, Vita Ayala, JDC and Mac Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nielsen, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Paul McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Holren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.